Happy Thursday, guys. It's 11:50, and I literally just got off a call with Leslie, and I was kindly reminded that I was going to show another recipe that I was supposed to do at the stand-up, but just didn't have time because of time constraints. And I wanted to provide this recipe for what I call a very healthy express lunch, especially in a situation where you just got off of a call, you're getting, it's noontime, you got to make something for lunch, but you have a meeting at 1 o'clock, which I actually do. So I wanted to show you what I call the Costco Express lunch, which basically is, it's a pasta with pretty much all organic ingredients. So we do have, right here, we have, your box of pasta. Here's some pesto. If you don't have time to make your own pesto, the Costco pesto is actually pretty good, and the ingredients are pretty good. Some organic grape tomatoes, some organic baby spinach, some salt and pepper, and a shallot. So let's get to it. Okay, so the first thing I did was I started to get the water going for the pasta. You can put a little olive oil in the water or some salt. Some people may or may not agree with it. It depends on your taste for pasta, but for me it's more for texture and flavor. But this is the first thing that needs to get going with your time constraints, because it does take time for the water to boil. So while you're doing that, get all of your ingredients prepped up. Next thing you want to do, maybe while you're prepping, is to get the oil ready. So I use avocado oil. And this is also from Costco. This may look familiar to you. I would put the oil on about a medium heat, because the first thing you're going to do is to get the onions going. So in terms of prepping, in terms of the raw materials, so I've cut the tomatoes in halves. I'm portioning for two. So once you cook down the tomatoes, they do tend to shrink a little bit. So I grab a couple handfuls for two people. I did cut up my shallot into tiny pieces, which I'm going to add very shortly. That's the first thing that's going in. And then lastly, a couple handfuls of the organic spinach that I showed you earlier. Also know that when you cook this down, these things also tend to shrink. So if it looks like you're adding a lot, that's okay, because it will shrink. Alright, so we got the onions going first. We want to get them to the point where the color of it becomes a little bit more of a clear kind of color. It's got a little bit of purple right now, but once it gets to the point, you move it around enough. It's on medium heat right now. So just move it to the point until it starts to get a nice, clear color. And then we'll add the tomatoes in next. Okay, so as I was checking on the onions, the water's ready to go. So I put in about just around half the box in here. So it's going to go in the water, and according to the packaging, it's going to be ready in about 10 minutes, 10 to 11 minutes. I always find, though, it's good to kind of taste and taste one along the way when it gets close to time, because sometimes it's not always accurate. One tip for you: do not crack that spaghetti. It's just, I don't know, it's just my own personal preference, but I like the spaghetti intact and long as it is. So if you have a pot that's not as deep, eventually the pasta does sink in. Don't crack that, yes. Okay, so the onions are ready to go, so I'm going to throw the tomatoes in at this point. It looks like it's got a little bit of browning, so you don't want it to burn. Alright, the tomatoes are in, so we're just going to cook them down. We'll put it down to maybe just a little bit below medium heat and just swirl it around. In about a minute, we can throw in the spinach, and you'll see that the color is actually really, really nice. One quick note, you could also season a little bit of the tomatoes with a little bit of the sea salt at this point, but also because they tend to be a little tart, Sometimes I put a little tiny dash of sugar on the tomatoes to remove some of that tartness. Again, that's a personal preference. So probably about maybe 3-4 minutes in, you'll see that everything is pretty cooked down. The spinach that looked like a lot at the time doesn't look that much like there's that much at all. So at this point, once it's all cooked down, it's a good time now to put in the pesto. You don't want to burn the pesto, so I would actually turn the heat off at this point and then just pop it in. So I'm going to pop in maybe about a tablespoon or so. I'll add a little bit more because I feel like it. So that, and simply mix that around. The heat is off at this point, so just by this point it's easy to mix the pesto into the rest of the concoction. And I would say taste it too. You got to taste it just to make sure that the seasoning is to your liking. Okay, the pasta is ready. It took about 7.5-8 minutes for this, so all you're gonna do is dump it right in and just mix it around until it's covered. Mixed in nicely. Okay, so this is the final product. If you want to present it well, if you remember the tool that I had suggested from my tips, I simply just twirled the pasta, plated it right in the bowl, and I added a little bit of Parmigiano Reggiano. So if you got a grater and you got a block of Parmigiano, just grate right on top, and that's your express lunch. It is 12:24. I started filming this at 11:53. It doesn't take long at all, so hope you get a chance to try it someday in between meetings. Cheers.